This is the press preview, a first look at the newspapers as they arrive. And in the next half hour, we'll talk through those headlines with the author and journalist, Rachel Shabi, and the lead writer at the Daily Telegraph, Tim Stanley. Good to see you both this evening. Before we have a chat, let's run you through the front pages, should we? We'll start with the Sunday Times. It says all school children will be back in the classroom on the 8th of March, with the Prime Minister expected to set out a lockdown exit strategy in the coming weeks. The Sunday Telegraph says adults will be given some small freedoms on the same date, including picnics and coffee in the park. The Mail on Sunday, meanwhile, says lockdown will end by Easter, with people free to drink in beer gardens and dine outside restaurants once again. The Sunday Express leads with demands that the third lockdown in England should be the last one. It says a powerful group of Tory MPs has told the Prime Minister to lift all restrictions by May. The Observer carries claims from a leading scientist that the UK repeatedly failed to heed early warnings about the virus as the government looks set to achieve its vaccination target. Scotland on Sunday reports that the number of people catching COVID in hospital is at a record high. And the Daily Star Sunday claims the army is killing hundreds of dogs instead of rehoming them when they retire from service. OK, let's talk through some of those stories with Rachel Shabi and Tim Stanley. Good to see you both. Let's start with The Observer, should we? Looking at Donald Trump with that impeachment vote going in his favour in the last few hours. Rachel, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yes, of course. Yes. So Donald Trump acquitted again the second time. 57 to 43 was the vote that came in just now. Only 7 Republicans turned against Trump this time round, and it needs a 2/3 majority, of course, to impeach him. And it is a very dangerous signal that this is sending, of course, in the US, because signalling essentially that this incitement was essentially okay. Now, the minority speaker, Chuck Schumer, said there is no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for inciting what we saw, that terrible scenes at Capitol Hill on the 6th of January, but was still acquitted. So what kind of message exactly does that say when, yes, he was responsible, but also he's going to get away with it? So a lot of people are saying that this is putting the US in a very scary position, and the fact that Biden is now president does not mean by any means that the US is out of the danger zone here.
Yeah, well, it was Mitch McConnell, that wasn't it, the Republican Senate leader. And it seems extraordinary, Tim, that you know, here is a man who voted to acquit President Trump, then immediately comes out and says he was, as Rachel was saying, practically and morally responsible for the riot, and indicating there could be a private prosecution.
Right. Well, okay, the counter-argument, of course, is that the impeachment should never have been brought in the first place because Trump had left the White House. Therefore, it was constitutionally just about valid because the alleged crimes were committed while he was in the White House. But as he was out of it, the trial itself was a waste of time. But I think the fact that Republicans voted the way they did reminds us that impeachment is a political process. It's not an ordinary criminal trial. It takes place because the other party controls the House and can put it forward to the Senate. And it was defeated because the Democrats do not have a 2/3 majority to see it through in the Senate. So in other words, it splits pretty much on party lines. Of those 7 Republicans who did vote to convict the president, most of them were either at the beginning of a long term, so they're not facing an internal challenge, or they knew they were stepping down, or they were a regular rebel like Mitt Romney. So in other words, these are people who calculated that they wouldn't have to deal with the blowback from the Republican base of voting to convict. And that's really what is driving Republican attitudes and behavior right now is a terror of what happens if I take a stand against Donald Trump. I'm going to have to go up against the base. And they're torn because, to some extent, the Republicans just want rid of Trump now. They'd like to move on. They'd like to deal with Biden, fight Biden on his own terms, and they'd like to come up with a fresh candidate in 2024. The last thing they want is the specter of Trump running again. On the other hand, anyone who wants the nomination in 2024 is going to have to win Trump's endorsement because he comes out of this trial still an incredibly powerful man with, crucially, a $30 million war chest that he has built up since the election under his belt. Trump is not going to go anywhere, and he's going to continue to call the shots. And that is why Republicans are frightened of turning on him.
OK, let's have a look at things which are affecting us a little bit more directly, well, a lot more directly. The Sunday Telegraph looking at the virus, the lockdown, and a potential sort of roadmap out of lockdown, and particularly, Tim, your paper looking at the pubs issue.
Yes, it's always intriguing what bits of the unwinding of the lockdown get leaked to different papers. So the Times is going with schools, the Mail is going mostly with pubs. We're going with meeting outside. So as of March the 8th, one thing we know for certain is that you will be able to sit on a bench with someone from outside your household, or you'll be able to go outside for a picnic with someone from your household. It is also anticipated that a little bit later, pubs will begin to reopen. The big question there, however, is around schools. And what the Times tells us is that as of March the 8th, it won't just be primary schools that will be reopening, but all schools. We were reporting that primary schools were certainly going to open, but we were under the impression that it might be a week later before secondary schools do. So basically, that the government is very cleverly leaking little bits and pieces across all the different papers so that everyone has something to say. But what it builds up to is March the 8th is the day when things start to go in the other direction, when we start to unlock. Having gone through a period of locking down, that's when things will start to ease up a little.
I mean, it's almost a bit of a dangerous game, Rachel, isn't it? To put a date on things. Well, we've seen this time and time again. You know, it's very much shifting goalpost here.
No, I completely agree. There's a danger here of raising people's expectations, but it also seems to be an upside down way of going about it. I mean, I agree that there should be an exit strategy, and goodness knows we're all fed up, even though we overwhelmingly support the lockdown and think that it's necessary. But it would make more sense for the government to say, OK, well, we will release this thing, we will ease this thing if by X date, infection figures are at this number, hospitalizations are at this number. That would make much more sense as a trajectory. And already many scientists are warning that, if we ease things too quickly or, just release too many things at the same time, we actually run a risk of going into another lockdown, which, of course, nobody wants.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Tim, in one of the reports we've had on Sky News today, I mean, a restaurateur saying the problem is, he'd rather stay closed than have to reopen and then close again because of all the problems that causes.
I certainly don't think that an indoor restaurant business is going to open soon. They're definitely going to have to wait for some time well into the spring. The counter-argument, of course, is that the point of the vaccine program is to help drive down infections and deaths. And those have fallen quite significantly in the past week. So if they are falling, and if we've got this combination of the lockdown and the vaccine, then isn't that logically the moment to which things should start to ease up? Shouldn't they begin to reopen?
Can I just say that?
If not, to reopen.
That's actually not how it works. That's not how it works. It's a fundamental misunderstanding. The vaccine rollout is terrific, but the people that we are seeing hospitalized at the moment are under 60, i.e. the people who have yet to be vaccinated. So the last thing we want to do is say, well, we've got,
right,
up to 15 million people vaccinated, which again is brilliant news. but there will still be the virus circulating amongst a population that will still get very ill to the degree that they need to be hospitalized.
Okay, I understand that. I understand that. Everyone knows the nature of the demographics of people going to hospital. But Matt Hancock told the Telegraph that we were looking at all adults being vaccinated by September. So by the logic of that argument, that people under 70 could catch this and could go to hospital, by the logic of that argument, we would leave the entire country locked down until September. Now, plainly, no one wants to do that for economic reasons, educational reasons, but also for health reasons. We don't want to do that. As we vaccinate and as the cases go down and as the death rate goes down, it should not surprise anyone that we will begin to, in very small, incremental ways, unlock. And perhaps the government has still got to persuade us to take that risk. But my goodness, we have to do it because we can't stay like this until the autumn.
No, I completely agree with you. But I think what's missing from this debate is that we just have the government saying, well, we're going to release this, we're going to release that. And actually, what we need to see is them saying, well, given that the situation really isn't safe, even though we have the vaccine rollout, what is it that we can do, A, to make sure that we can ease the situation in a manner that is safer. So have an efficient test and trace system, which we haven't talked about for a long time, but let's not forget that that was hived off to the private sector to the cost of billions and they bungled it. What can we do to make schools safer? So how can we increase ventilation in schools so that children can go back in? And meanwhile, if things do need to stay shut down, what can we do to protect people who are suffering the most from a continuing lockdown? Those elements are not brought into the conversation. I agree with you that we definitely cannot go on like this indefinitely, but we're not talking about how to make sure we can actually ease that in a sustainable way.
Well, look, we need to leave it there for the time being. You both raised some very, very important points there. And I know we're all going to be thinking about this moving forward, aren't we, as to just when and how we should be coming out of lockdown and when we want to do it as individuals. Let us know your thoughts, as always. But coming up, spare a thought for those single in lockdown on Valentine's Day.
The wind was like pulling us out of that little room. Mandatory evacuation, you must leave.
I'm Greg Milam, Sky's US correspondent here in Los Angeles. It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
I've seen the dark side of America. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. I've seen heartbreaking human stories.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
the early risers.
We examine the story beyond the headline.
For the knowledge seekers.
Welcome to Divided States.
For the straight talkers. The curious and the ones who want to be entertained.
Backstage Sky News' entertainment podcast.
For wherever you are.
Welcome to Sophie Ridge on Sunday podcast.
For the ones who want to know more.
Welcome to the All Out Politics podcast.
For the listeners.
From Sky News Storycast.
Sky News Podcasts. Listen and subscribe for free.
This is the press preview, and we're looking through the papers with the journalist and author Rachel Shabi and the lead writer at the Telegraph, Tim Stanley. Let's have a look at the... Oh, we've lost Tim. Never mind, Rachel. Well, you get free rein while we get Tim back on Skype. Looking at the Sunday Telegraph and universities' cancel culture.
Yes, this is the story that ministers want to fine universities that supposedly stifle freedom of speech. Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, is set to announce this policy and also appoint a free speech champion. And at the same time, the Culture Secretary, Oliver Dowden, wants to tell heritage bodies and charities to defend our culture, whatever that means. So it's like a two-pronged attack. There's been a lot of talk about, cancel culture in universities. Much of it has to be said whipped up. When the Parliamentary Joint Committee in 2018 looked into this, and its report concluded that there wasn't really, this phenomenon was not really going on in a way that was being suggested by right-wing papers such as the Telegraph and the Daily Mail. It's not actually a thing. It does seem to be very much a whipped up response from the government to something that really doesn't seem to be much of a problem. Confusing free speech with the right to, have a platform wherever you go. Student bodies are not mandated to platform right-wing people if they don't want to.
Okay, Tim, it's whipped up by the right-wing media. How do you respond to that as someone who we just cancelled and dropped off the show for a few minutes?
You didn't cancel me. My Wi-Fi connection cancelled me. I'm so sorry. I live in a sort of I'm in a black spot here, I'm afraid. Look, we are reporting what the government tells us. So it's not a case of us whipping anything up. It's a case of us reporting what the government's doing. And the government is approaching this from two fronts. One is that it's going to inform public bodies that they cannot use public money for political purposes. I think that's perfectly reasonable. And the second is that student bodies risk being fined if they attempt to take away people's right to speak. I think in both cases, what the government's really trying to do is to nudge institutions back to doing the things that they exist to do. Universities are supposed to be centres of free speech where people can speak their mind and argue and debate. And likewise, heritage bodies are supposed to be there to conserve and preserve culture. They're not there to push a political agenda, and especially not if they're receiving public monies to do it. So really, the government's just trying to get institutions to do what those institutions are there to do.
Well, look, it's interesting. Rachel's shaking her head, but we can't come back in it, Rachel, because I want to talk about what is the most important story, frankly, for Sunday, which is the fact it's Valentine's Day. I intend on having a very romantic 24 hours, let me tell you. What's Scotland on Sunday saying about it all?
Well, it's pointing out that, of course, for a lot of people, there are millions of single-person households across the UK. So people who are basically stuck on their own during lockdown and therefore will be spending Valentine's Day on their own. So the paper is asking us to spare a thought for the population of people who will be having a Valentine's Day with themselves, essentially.
Yes. Well, I've had 45 years of Valentine's Days on my own. This year, I'm not. So, I haven't got any sympathy.
Well,
sorry. Are you smooching with anyone, Tim?
No, I can assure you this is not the first Valentine's Day that I've spent on my own.
Oh.
But I don't care, because on Monday, I am taking receipt of a new puppy. So I shall be very happy thereafter. The 15th is my red letter day. I shall have my puppy, and I shall not be alone ever again.
Perfect. Look, really good to see you both. Thank you very much indeed.